Picture of Dorian Gray was written in 1890, and it's considered a classic. So does this portrait of Vanity hold up today? Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is Spineless Books, your one-stop, spoiler-free shop for all things audiobook. Now, there are definitely a lot of readers out there who have one genre that they love, and it's tried and true, and they stick to it. But then there are readers like me who like to mix up what they're reading and make sure that they have a huge variety of options. So that's why I joined a classics book club that only reads books that are over 100 years old. We've taken on a variety of books like The House of Mirth, My Antonia, The Great Gatsby, and even Frankenstein. And what I've learned by reading these books that are over 100 years old, as someone who reads really often, is that sometimes the language is just really hard to get into. It can be dense or outdated, or it can be really fresh and current. So a lot of these books are hard because the language is not what we say today. So for example, when I read Frankenstein in high school, I remembered loving every second of it. But I also realize now I didn't read the entire book in high school. Not because I didn't, we just didn't go over the whole thing in class. Although maybe because I didn't. But anyway, Frankenstein is dense, the language is thick and really verbose and wordy, and it's not the easiest to adjust your brain to. But The Picture of Dorian Gray doesn't suffer that challenge. It's fresh and modern, and it feels like, even though it was written in 1890, it could have been written today. The story begins when a painter named Basil is telling his friend Lord Henry Wotton, who's quite a hedonist, that he has found a new muse, a young man named Dorian Gray, who in his opinion is one of the most handsome young men he has ever seen. And he also believes that Dorian Gray, in a weird way, has some magic powers, because he has pulled out of Basil the best portrait he has ever painted. He's so proud of it, and even though it's not even finished at the beginning of the story, he knows it's going to be his finest work of art ever. Lord Henry is very curious by Basil's discovery of this young man and wants to meet him for himself. And when they meet, Dorian and Lord Henry become great friends very quickly. In fact, Basil almost falls out of the picture entirely. Dorian Gray is influenced by Lord Henry's hedonistic tendencies, and he starts to follow in his footsteps a little bit more than he previously would have. Shortly after that, Basil gifts Dorian the painting, and Dorian puts it in his house, and that's when things get a little strange. As Dorian begins regularly staring at this portrait of himself, where he does really enjoy how he looks, he makes this tiny little wish that the painting would age instead of him. He doesn't really think much of it at the time, but within a couple of weeks he starts to notice that the painting is changing, or it seems like it might be changing. And the more this happens, the more creeped out Dorian gets. You see, his wish has in fact come true, and the book then proceeds to follow the next 10 years of his life, where Dorian doesn't age, but the portrait does. He remains as attractive as ever while that portrait gets more and more frightening by the day. The novel goes on to explore the impact of this wish on Dorian's life. How it affects his relationships, his professionalism, his standing in the community, his behavior, pretty much everything. It also talks about his ability to cope quite a bit, because honestly, this turns out to be a pretty big burden after all. I love how Oscar Wilde captures the slow descent into poor decision-making. While we know he's made this one really bad call, as he gets deeper and deeper into this story, some of his decisions are not the wisest, and they don't exactly help his plight. Even though he can't get out of the first decision, he's not helping himself here. One of the great pleasures of listening to this book was the narrator Simon Vance. I'm a big fan of Simon Vance. I love his vibe. It's just sort of the classic, older, British, maybe grandpa, not really sure how old he is actually, but he's very soothing, and I feel like I trust him as a narrator. It's really interesting because it reminds me of being told a story as a child, and it has in every book I've listened to him narrate. He really has a classic voice, and he does just the right amount of pushing the limits of the language. When I was looking for a copy of this book, there were tons of options, so I started flipping through to see who the available narrators were. Many of them were people I hadn't heard of, and there were a few famous people, but the minute I saw Simon Vance as an option, I knew he was my guy. I felt so immersed in his voice and in the story that I went through this entire book in just a single day. I think had it not been Simon Vance, I might have taken more breaks, but there's something about him that makes me just want to keep listening. Something that struck me about The Picture of Dorian Gray, and then made me start to think about other classics that I've read, particularly those that are over 100 years old, is the simplicity of theme. So many modern books, and don't get me wrong, I love this about them, but so many modern books are filled with layered, complicated themes, often multiple themes, that weave together and impact each other. I find that older books tend to focus on a single theme, like in this case, Vanity, and they tend to explore that theme fully and all the way through. And it's really different than books today, where you get lots of small themes that all sort of interweave and go together, but it's not like there's a central theme to every book, or if there is, it's a central theme that always has sub-themes. So I appreciate the simplicity of these older novels, where they really just focus on one thing. This book is about vanity, plain and simple. There's a really clear explanation of what vanity does, and granted it's a little fantastical, but it really gets the point driven home. I think Oscar Wilde kept this novel to this one theme because honestly, it was enough, and maybe it was pioneering at the time in a way that it isn't today, but it still resonates, even though it was written in 1890, and that's a pretty incredible claim. I think if you're interested in diving into some older classics and are worried about possibly things feeling dated and not applying, then you shouldn't worry about that with The Picture of Dorian Gray. This is a great classic to get started with. It's short, it's fresh, and it's really relatable. And I think it matters that you approach classics that work for you. Why should we slog through novels that we're not enjoying? If you have an assignment, okay, maybe, but honestly, if you're reading for pleasure like me, go for what feels good. I really enjoyed The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and I highly recommend it as an entry classic with lots to discuss. It's gonna leave you thinking, that's for sure. But remember, you might love what I hate and hate what I love, so make your own opinion. But thanks for listening to mine. See you next time.